Brilliant. Okay, well, welcome to Tia's presentation. I'm really looking forward to this. Obviously I have no voice, so I'm keeping introductions to a minimum. Any questions that you guys have, put in the chat, and then I will pose those to Tia after her presentation. Over to you, Tia.
Bless you, Jo. I know what a committed little PBS angel you are to have turned up today when you feel the way you do. I'm just glad that you feel a bit better than you did before. Thank you all for joining us. This is, I hope nobody has ended up on this twice, because this is pretty much the same presentation that I delivered for Behaviour Live, but there were a lot of people who didn't have access to that because it was run through the university. So I agreed to do it again, somewhat with trepidation, because this is like a trigger warning, I suppose, is that I'm going to say some pretty critical things about the system that we work in and about our science. And it's not because I don't appreciate the desperately hard work that people in the social care or health system are doing, including behaviour analysts. It's because over the past couple of years, working in some of the settings that we've been working in, I think we've recognised some recurrent themes. And the more I do this, the more I figure out that other people know this stuff too, and yet it just doesn't seem to be being publicly addressed or really talked about. And I think talking about it has got to be the place where we start to make it better. And there's a whole, the Do Better movement in ABA, which I absolutely love. And in Teresa's talk this morning, we decided we're going to start our own coalition, and it's going to be the It Can Be Done movement, because people do not need to be being supported in some of the settings that they are being supported in. So brief overview. I'm going to talk about what the situation is in the UK right now. I know that there are lots of people living really good lives, and I'm thrilled for them. They are not the people that I'm going to be talking about. Primarily, we're going to be talking about the people who have fallen through the gaps and some of the more organisational reasons why that might be the case. And I just want to double check. I was going to text you about this actually, but given we're going to be talking about the right to effective treatment and like OBM type stuff, we are doing CEUs for this one, aren't we? Yes, that's fine. Just before I give people words and they go, what? No. Okay, we're going to talk about a couple of case examples, all anonymized, but real life scenarios. And then I am hoping you guys will get involved in the chat, because I don't have the answers to this, but I'd really love for us to talk about what some of the potential solutions are to that. I've asked all the other speakers to introduce themselves, and I feel really weird doing this myself, because obviously I'm a host for most of these sessions, but obviously I am one of the PBS UK team. Our team has grown since this photo up there, actually. We have an addition of a Hugh and a Katie, so I need to update that photo. I am mother to Jamie, and although he is 18 or 19 months old now, I leave that photo because if anybody can't see that, his baby Grow says Manding for cuddles. Which always makes me happy. I have Odin, the French Bulldog. We also have Brie, the French Bulldog puppy. And I have been working in positive behaviour support for a while, but one of the major inspirations in my life is this woman here, Carola Dillenberger, who is my PhD supervisor and a complete powerhouse of a behaviour analyst. So she has really shaped the way that I view the world. PBS UK obviously is PBS UK, and we're hosting this conference, so hopefully that is a name that's familiar to you. But some of the outcomes that I would like to achieve over the course of my is to recognise an individual's right to effective behavioural treatment, and to really get clear on the fact that, particularly if you're working under the auspices of the BCBA, there is a very clear right to effective treatment, effective behavioural treatment, that very often I think some people are not getting. To identify some of the systemic challenges to autistic people accessing that treatment. And I think primarily I am going to be talking about autistic people because if you look at the Out of Sight report or some of the CQC reports, a huge portion of that group who are stuck in hospital, they have a diagnosis of autism. And to consider a few solutions. on top of Corolla, I also just need to recognise a couple of our inspirations, PBS UK's inspirations in some of the work that we referenced through here. Some of the strategies that I'm talking about, they don't belong to us, and I would not like to give you any sense that they did. But the people who have really inspired the work that we do include the wonderful Brian McLean from this morning. I hope you all, or at least lots of you, got to see him, because he is just amazing. And particularly his intervention sequence outline is just a really lovely structured way of approaching the treatment of complex and challenging behaviour to help people get out of these situations that we're in. Obviously, the beautiful Greg Hanley and his process is really effective ways of helping people who experience complex or challenging behaviour. I've put Lux Consulting up there because when I have been working with organisations, some of the conversations I've had with Leah in particular have really helped me figure out what's going on at an organizational level. And then obviously, most importantly, to the families of the people that I work with, who are just incredible, and to the teams that surround them, without whom nothing would be done ever. So Jo, you will be more familiar with this than me, because Jo is the queen of ethics when it comes to the behaviour analysis. But BCB Ethical Code 2.09, treatment or intervention efficacy. Clients have a clear right to effective treatment, and behaviour analysts have an obligation to advocate for or educate the client about scientifically supported most effective treatment procedures. In other words, if you're a behaviour analyst that is governed by the BCBA, it's not just that you should do something, it's that you must do something if you believe that a client's right to effective treatment is not being met. In other words. Now, that isn't necessary. It doesn't mean that you have to challenge each and every single non-scientifically evidence-based, not in my opinion, treatment that a person might be going through. For example, social stories, not a great deal of research to support their use in some settings. We don't need to barge in and tell people to stop using social stories under every circumstance. That is not going to help. But we do have to be clear that the people we work with have a right to effective treatment, and that we need to advocate for that. I kind of already did this. This was to remind me to do that trigger warning. I'm going to be frank. I'm going to criticize the system. I'm going to discuss issues that might be hard to hear about. I'm going to talk about sedation. I'm going to talk about seclusion. I'm going to talk about restraint. None of those are nice topics. But it's the kind of dirty laundry of the social care system that people like to put in the cupboard and pretend isn't there when we have visitors. And the reality is it's there. And until we bring it out of the cupboard and we really talk about it and we really get into the nitty-gritty of it, then I'm not sure how much progress we will be able to achieve. So some of the major events, obviously, that most people will know about, this is not going to be particularly new to people, but it's Winterbourne View and Wharton Hall. My guess is that almost everyone who is watching this is familiar with those names, knows who they are. And I think we probably all hoped when Winterbourne View happened, what was that, 2013? Was it? I can't remember. I'm dreadful with dates. It was a while ago. It was at least 10 years ago. So that would not be 2013. That I think we all hoped, oh my God, that is horrific. Something radical is going to happen and it's never going to happen again. We're never going to see that again. And then along came Wharton Hall. And a little bit after that, along came Coston Park. And it won't be the end. Thank you, Mary, 2011. It won't be the last time. It will continue to happen because there is something screwy in our system. Where particularly over the last 2 years, and we'll talk about some of the data over the last two years, if anything, things are getting worse. And this issue we have with closed cultures is getting worse. And COVID, although completely unavoidable, has actually really made some of that more of an issue than it even was before. Autistic people with and without learning disabilities are being horribly let down, shamefully let down. And it's one of this report here on the right with the purple, it's called Out of Sight, was published in 2020, 2020, it's right there on it. And it presented some of the really horrifying sort of situation, the reality for a lot of people who are being, rather than receiving treatment, they are being contained, would be the way I think to describe it. People, and those a huge portion of those people are autistic and or have a learning disability. So some of the facts within that out of sight report were updated in an update that was released in December 2021. Oh dear, sorry. So during the, oh, can you hear Jamie crying? Is it okay? Sorry, he's just gotten home.
Yeah, it's all right. I made Si go like, is that Hester?
No.
And not here, she's at nursery.
Okay, so in the original 2020 report, when they published that report, there were 66 people in what's called long-term segregation across hospitals in the United Kingdom. So long-term segregation, meaning that they are locked away effectively from everyone else, they have their own space, they do not have regular or contact with, well, may not have regular contact with even staff. And on some of the worst examples that I've experienced of that, it was literally a gentleman locked in a flat, and he had a you know, like a hatch, like a post box on the door at the entry to his flat where people would put trays of food through, you know, and unless it was within the context of a medical need or the need for restraint, then he wouldn't be in a room with persons. So long-term segregation really is quite severe. When that number was published in 2019, so the year before, that was 77. So I think people were feeling sort of relatively, okay, well, at least it's coming down. Okay, well, they refreshed that in November 2021, and we are up to 112. So in the past 2 years, not even, what are we talking, like 21 months or something, that the number of people in LTS, long-term segregation or prolonged seclusion, has jumped from 66 to 112. If anything, well, quite frankly, we're going in the opposite direction to the direction we want to be going in. As of October 2021, the data shows that over half, 56%, of autistic people with a learning disability who were receiving inpatient care had been there for a total stay of more than 2 years. So they'd been in hospital for more than 2 years, and 17% of those had been in hospital for more than 10 years, which is just, I think it's worth pausing over. I mean, like 10 years of your life, you know, 10 years of your child's life spent in an inpatient setting, not necessarily being clear what treatment is occurring, or what the future holds for your child or loved one. And I think that must be so, if it hurts my heart and it's not my loved one, I can't imagine how it feels to the people who are directly involved. Some of that will be about COVID related things. I think there has obviously been staffing shortages, and you know, the State of Care in 2021, which is a publication around the state of care, unsurprisingly, made the point that health and social care staff are exhausted and the workforce is depleted. And I don't think there's a single one of us would argue with that. I have been working with a lot of services this year where they wouldn't, you know, staffing is always difficult in the social care setting, but where things is just a crisis. You know, there is nowhere to get the staff from. Agency don't have staff, so it's not even like you can call agency and cover it in. You know, it really is a complete crisis, and people are lost and they don't know what to do. So I think that really does obviously need addressing, but we also need to address the fact that the system has a problem. It's not just COVID, it's not just the staffing issues. We're seeing that people are being moved from hospitals that are closing because the provision of care is deemed as inadequate, and being moved to other hospitals that are also being deemed as providing inadequate treatment. So something is not being addressed somewhere. Just slightly more than 10 years ago, or I think, or possibly around 10 years ago, following the Winterbourne View tragedy, the Transforming Care programme was launched. And the purpose of the Transforming Care programme, for anyone who doesn't know, hopefully, forgive me if you do know, and for repeating myself, but the purpose of the Transforming Care programme was to improve the lives of people with LD and autism and behaviours of concern, and to recognise that if a person is in hospital because they were autistic or because of a behaviour of concern that doesn't require medical treatment, then they should be supported to live back in their community settings. I'm sure this is not going to be a massive surprise to anybody. Spoiler alert, there was a huge amount of money funneled into the Transforming Care agenda. It didn't work. Okay. When the Transforming Care agenda was first launched, it was 3,250 individuals were recognised as being in hospital who did not need to be. As of February 2021, there was still at least 2,050 people in hospital who did not need to be. That's 10 years later. Initially, they set a 2-year deadline, and I think the 2-year deadline was to half the number of people in hospital. They missed it completely. They refreshed the timetable looking for 50% reduction by March 2019. Again, they missed it completely. And as of February 2021, like I said, there was still 66-ish% of the people who were meant to have been moved out of hospital were still there 10 years later. And sadly, when we're talking about children under 18s with a learning disability or autism, the number of people in inpatient units actually increased since the start of the Transforming Care program. We're going in completely the wrong direction. So if anybody is a reader and has not read this book yet, if you enjoy reading and you have not read this book, then I cannot encourage you more strongly to do so. Alexis Quinn, and you know, she's not the biggest proponent of PBS as far as I'm aware, and that's fine because we don't need everybody to be talking to agree to be the biggest lovers of PBS, but she talks about her own perception of or her own experience of being in inpatient settings, and how she felt like she was let down by the systems that were supposed to be healing her, and how actually the systems that were supposed to be healing her were making her worse, because they did not recognize her unique individual autistic presentation. They did not recognize her sensory differences. They did not recognize her need for routine. And one particular story that she told that really stood out for me was that they had a activity schedule that she was required to follow over the course of the day, and at one point they were doing a colouring activity, which she quite liked, arts and crafts, so I think she was quite happy to be doing that, you know, relatively happy to be doing that, but they gave her a picture that she had to colour in. And then it got to the end of that hour slot and they said to her, right, you need to go and do this different activity now, but she hadn't finished her picture. She hadn't finished colouring in the picture. And she said, no, I need to finish it. And they said, no, you need to go. And that resulted in her being taken to seclusion, which I can't get my head around, because understanding that autistic people struggle with attention shifting, executive function, and would prefer to finish their colouring picture is so basic. And actually our systems are so rigid, you know, the staff need to follow this routine and people need to be here at this time and here at this point, completely incompatible with her needs as an individual. So I'm not going to tell her story because she tells her story beautifully, and I would encourage everybody to go and read it. It does have a slightly happy ending if people need to be reassured by that. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. We are a decade on from Winterbourne View. We are a decade on from Transforming Care, and people are still being subjected to unthinkable abuse at the hands of the people who should be protecting them. Our challenging behaviour and mental health services are often ill-equipped or understaffed, and really not in a position to be able to provide quality behavioural interventions. And sometimes, to be honest, the understanding of behaviour analysis is patchy at best. So there are major failings in our approaches, and it's not failings on you know, any particular individual. Okay, so I want to be clear that 99.9% of the staff I've ever met are beautiful people trying to do the right thing, but the system as a whole is ill-equipped, and we need to talk about that. We need to be clear about that. And if we are working with organizations, we've got to talk about it. We can't be afraid that we're going to hurt people's feelings, although there is a way of pitching it that I'll get to later. Okay, so problem number one, a lack of regulation and recognition of behaviour analysis in the UK. I'm probably preaching to the choir, but because behaviour analysis is not regulated or widely recognised as being like a distinct profession, what we often end up with is amazing care workers or support workers being given the role of the PBS practitioner without that background knowledge, without that background understanding, or doing like a 2 or a 3 or even a 4-day course in positive behaviour support. Now, some of those courses are amazing, but they do not a behaviour analyst make. Okay. And I think it's really desperately unfair that our system places the responsibility for behavior change on someone who does not have the skills and then does not support them to develop those skills. And I don't think it's because we hope they fail. I think it's because the social care and health sector doesn't realize that actually behavior analysis is a separate science, is a distinct science, and that there are master's degrees or undergraduate degrees that are required to really help someone understand that properly. So sometimes that results in, on the best side of things, sometimes that results in plans that don't work. On the worst side of things, that results in plans that make things worse. And contributes to a poor perception of PBS, because PBS done badly is bad. It's not a good thing. Point number 2, how am I for time? I'm doing okay. Am I running on? What am I doing? Yeah. I can't see the clock.
Yeah, it's 12:05.
Oh, there's the clock. I found it. There you go. I'm worried I'm running on. Our profession is not terribly well understood, and we are not always the best at helping matters. I love our science. I love the concepts. I'm obsessed with it. Jo will have to admit at some point in her life, I'm sure that she was my clinical supervisor for a few years, and I was dreadful for texting her, like, of an evening being like, my child just did this. That's a CMOR, right? And Jo would have to put up with me because I loved concepts and I loved talking about it. There is a time and a place, and it's okay for me to talk about that with Jo. I am going to make myself unpopular if I start talking about that with people that do not understand behavioral science, because science communication is a skill and we need to practice it. And I had this conversation with Carola, where in the QUB masters, they have a whole section that's about turning real life scenarios into behavior analytic language. So you operationally define everything. What they don't practice is going back in the opposite direction. And I think that somebody out there should be considering making that like a required part of the task list, that you've got to go in the opposite direction. Is it part of the updated task list? Who knows? Okay, well, never mind. And again, I did say she was an inspiration for this talk. So Lux Consulting and Leah gave a talk last year that was how to burn a bridge. And it was about one of the, basically how to make yourself thoroughly unpopular. And one of the, it was tongue in cheek, by the way, she wasn't being serious, but one of the things she was talking about was exactly that. Make sure your writing is inappropriate, unintelligible, and way too long. And that way you can be absolutely certain that the staff teams who need to use the behavior support plans won't have a chance. So I think we need to practice communicating more intelligibly and at a level that most staff are going to be able to work with us on. I need to find this resource because people have asked me about it before, but there was a study done in the UK that assessed the literacy levels of direct frontline care staff. And on average, an average member of frontline care staff's reading skills came out at between 8 and 11 years. So if we know that, we need to then be writing plans that are pitched to be understood by somebody with a reading level of 8 to 11 years, and then checking that they are understanding that. All right, problem number 3, and this is a massive one, is the way we train our staff. I'm going to ask people to jump into the chat. If you work in a social care organization, what are the 2 support strategies that your staff receive the most training in, the ones that you devote the most time to training staff or money or resources? This is when we find out if they've all actually left. Anybody, what kinds of care practices do you train your support staff best in? Medication administration PBS plans, that's encouraging. Manual handling, okay. Some people doing PBS. Physical intervention, there it is. Medication administration, physical intervention. MAPA, managing violent progression of restraint. Risk aversion, sure, okay. So most of the organizations that I work with are, they have a staff induction, but if you were to look at the hours spent per strategy, the most focus spent per strategy, in general, the most time is devoted to medication administration and physical intervention, because those are the ones that we cannot afford to get wrong. Those are the ones that result in, they're mandatory. You know, if that's required, we have got to do it. Nobody is providing a physical intervention course that lasts just a day. If techniques are actually required, sometimes they're up to a week. Yeah. That is ludicrous to me, because the two strategies that we want staff not to use, and that the PBS, you know, goals are, please don't use these as much as you can, will be PRN and physical intervention. So what we're effectively saying to staff with the training we're offering is, these are the strategies that we don't want you to use, but we're going to train you the best in them. We want you to use the ones you're not trained so well in. And from a behavioural skills perspective, that is just crazy. I love behaviour skills training. I'm really into it. And I like to give this example of learning to drive a car. So if you're learning to drive a car, we all understand there's various stages to that. We have the verbally competent bit, which is a bit like your theory test, where you go and you say, if I see this sign, I've got to do this. And if I see this, then I've got to do that. And that's fine. If someone came and said to you, hey, I've passed my theory test, please may I borrow your car? There is not a person in this room, I am sure, or potentially even wider, who would say yes to that, because we all understand that being able to say mirror, signal, maneuver does not mean that you can drive a car. We all understand that. The part that means you can drive a car is the bit that comes next. So that's I'm going to show you how to drive a car, and then you're going to have a turn. I'm going to watch you do it. And then once you've done all the parts right, I'll let you have a go on your own. Which is what we call the real life competency part, or the role play competency part. Those bits are very often missed. So often we write a PBS plan, we give it to the staff, we give them a read and sign sheet, verbal competency only, and not even that sometimes. And then we say, off you go. We don't do that with physical intervention. We do the role play and the real life competency checks with physical intervention. And we don't do that with medication administration because of the risk. We need to be training our staff up to real life competency in all aspects of the PBS plan. And that is a huge ask, because that requires training, you know, freeing staff up for additional training hours, which has an impact on the support service, which has an impact on cost. And I understand that, but until we are operating this way, we are not going to see the staff have the level of confidence delivering the PBS plan as we need them to have. So that there is the behaviour skills training model. Do not press the big red button. Milton Berger does some of the most beautiful research and I really love him. And some of what he's demonstrated is just exactly what I've just discussed, which is somebody telling you that they should do something, frankly, does not equate into them doing it. And Gatheridge in particular did a lovely, so Gatheridge did a research study about gun safety, where they taught kids verbally what they should do if they come across a gun. And the children were all able to say, if I see a gun, I should step away, alert an adult, don't touch it. And then they set up a proxy setting, like a fake scenario, where they had like it was a plaster cast type thing. So it wasn't a real gun, but it was designed to look very effective. And they were videoing to see what the kids would do. And the kids were allowed access to the area. And then they were, you know, obviously set up to discover the fake gun, and they watched what the kids would do, and absolutely, like, almost none of them walked away, didn't touch it, and alerted an adult. Almost all of them were like, ooh, shiny gun. Yeah, the ability to say what you should do does not translate into you actually doing it, and that is where behaviour skills training comes in. An additional factor is a lack of quality autism training, and obviously this is hopefully being addressed by some of the Oliver McGowan stuff that's going out and being piloted at the moment. I'm not aware of any of the results of that yet, but if anybody is aware in the chat, do let us know, because I'm looking forward to hearing about that. Problem number 4 is a lack of focus on the overall system. So people are very often trying to fix a problem for Jack in this particular setting. Whereas if you step back and look wider, You can see that the service was never right in the first place. We're trying to force a square peg into a round hole. You know, the staff well-being is far too low to be able to allow them to continue to support a person with this level of need on a regular basis, etc., etc. And you see much wider sense of concerns that are going to need addressed if we've got any hope of being successful in the future. And a quote that my lovely colleague Paddy uses all the time is, every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. And when he says that to me, what I think about is a marble run. It's all I can think about. So if you build a marble run and you're putting the marble in the top and it keeps coming out at the wrong end, you don't go, stupid marble won't go in the direction I want it to go in. You say, how have I built this wrong? Where is it dropping out? Where are the failings? And how can I stop that happening the next time I start my marble on its little journey through the marble run? The rat is always right. One final problem, I'm aware of time, I don't want to run on too much more, is that reinforcement within the organisational setup of health and social care is often contingent on the wrong outcomes. And some of really clear examples of that are, I've worked with organisations where the business development team are potentially going to receive bonuses depending on the number of placements they make over the course of a year. Not the number of sustained placements, i.e. placements that last at least 1 year, the number of placements. Now, if that is the case and reinforcement is available to these staff members for making placements, we can't be mad at them for doing it. We can't be annoyed that they're behaving in such a way as to contact reinforcement. That is a problem with the way that incentive, that's a perverse incentive, the way that is set up. The same is true for a lot of the private equity hospitals that are currently operating. We're telling them, we need you to treat this person and get them to a healthy space where they're ready for discharge. What happens when that person is healthy and ready for discharge? The private equity hospital stops getting paid. Okay. Another perverse incentive. They are potentially not motivated to achieve the outcome that we are hoping they will achieve, but then we're annoyed when they don't. I love that term, pervert. I think it was Sandy Toogood. I'm sorry if that's not right, but I'm sure he was the first person who said that to me. And I was like, that is just a brilliant term. Yes, of course, there is a lack of robust community placements, capacity and resource, but of the 2,000 and something people that are still in hospital, it's actually quite a small number who are rated as still being in hospital because there isn't a suitable community placement, something like 280. That's the reason next to their name why they have not been discharged yet. So I'm sure it could be the case for more, but I'm not quite sure. Staff are overstretched, exhausted, and so tired of being criticised. And because of that, they are tunnel vision, get through the day, get the job done, and not necessarily open to new ideas, even if they might be a really, really good idea. So where am I for time? I'm going to probably just skip. I'm going to skip to time for solutions. I'm only missing one slide, so nobody needs it. But some time for some solutions. And like I said, I really hope you guys have some answers. I definitely don't have all the answers. But public relations for behaviour support. People buy relationships, they buy stories. We've got to get better at that. We've got to get better at science communication and talking about outcomes in a way that is motivating, inspiring, and encouraging so that people want us at the table with them. Okay, we've got to make friends so that people want us to come along and be there. We have to continue with gentle persistence. Yeah. So even if you're working in a situation where maybe we're feeling we're not being heard or things can be done better, burning our bridges is not the answer. If people hate us, then they are not going to be receptive to what we might have to say. So gentle persistence is essential to keep pushing in the right direction without breaking those relationships. We need to have a focus on the wider system. And this is some of these findings are off the back of a project we did with NHS England, Health Education England 2020. And we were looking at some of the things that were needed within the PBS world to help push things forward. And we were looking at a continual push at all levels, policy, national, regional, organizational. And I think personally, I think the regulation of PBS is really important. We've got to minimize response effort and duplication for engaging with PBS. Okay, it needs to be easy to have us there. It needs to be the easier option to be using our strategies. We've got to design effective systems in partnership with the people themselves, their families, the community teams. We've all got to be working together. And I know it's easier said than done. And we really need to be talking with the relevant people about innovative commissioning, which thankfully is starting to happen, and I'm very excited about. We've got to improve practices for staff, more training, better training, demonstrating value, their value, and the value of PBS. And we've got to talk about empowerment. And if we can get all of these things right, then you will see people's lives start to improve, and you will see on an individual or on an organizational basis, behavior start to move in a more optimal direction. So in summary, behavior analysis has so much to bring. We have so much to offer as an as a field to help these people that we really are desperate to help. Like 99% of us really are desperate to help. So we have to think about, how do we create or design systems that are going to result in the outcomes we're looking for? How do we build that marble run to make sure that the marble ends up where it needs to be? And then we need to look at the individual behavior to ensure that people's right to effective treatment are being ensured through compassionate and person-centered means. All right, I hurried a little bit the last bit there because I was aware that we didn't have too long left to go, and I want other people to be able to say what they think is necessary and not for me to pretend to be the expert. Is that all right, Jo? I'm just about on time, maybe a little early.
So some people have put some other ideas in the chat as well. So we had the working together with MDT teams and other professionals is really important. Making sure that we take time to build relationships, because actually that does really pay off. And I think anyone who was in Brian McLean's talk earlier, he talked about that rapport building with the people we support being a really crucial step. I think absolutely working with other professionals and staff teams and families, rapport building is an absolutely crucial step. That was one sort of idea. PBS needs to be mandatory at induction. Oh gosh, there's more and more. I might give you a chance to have a read out, dear.
No, that's okay, your poor voice. Emily's made a point about there's definitely confusion between PBM and PBS, and I have also experienced this. And again, I think it's about the PR stuff for PBS. We've got to be clear about what we are. And I think that sometimes, so we work, I'm not saying that physical intervention providers are dreadful, we work with lots of them and many of them are great. But positive behavior support doesn't necessarily include physical intervention. In fact, we prefer that it didn't. And the goal actually of PBS is to render practices like that not necessary anymore. So I think we need to be really clear about the distinctions between the two practices. And I so often encounter people say, oh yes, we do PBS, they all do 4 days of MAPA. And I'm not criticizing MAPA, it's perfectly acceptable. It's just one of the options out there. But it tells me that people don't understand what PBS is. And that they're not clear on that. So that's a public relations type thing. And also I think the regulation of PBS as a profession would come into that too, which I know I bang on about. I wasn't sure where I sat on it for a while. I wasn't sure if I thought it was the right thing to do, because so many of the best practitioners I've ever worked with do not have a master's degree in behavior analysis. And I would never want to exclude them from the table. But I also think that because it's not regulated, we're at risk of having more poor practices out there. Family involvement, so true. It's absolutely crucial to help them understand. And quite often, I think we just need to be honest, the families are ostracized. We hear it so often, and the only thing, that families are difficult, or they put up barriers, or they have unrealistic expectations. I hear that stuff so often, and all I can end up thinking is that if my Jamie ever was in need of support services, I can absolute hand on heart promise you that I would not be quiet until I believed he had the best possible service out there. I wouldn't have it in me. I would be a nightmare, heaven forbid. In fact, we should maybe put something in writing, Jo, that if Jamie ever does need support services, that there's some kind of agreement there, because I know I wouldn't rest. I would be a disaster. And I think that is just, something we need to understand, that how families are motivated to to achieve the best. And yes, it can often be really difficult, but it's also how I would behave.
I think with families as well, like we have to remember, like most families, especially if you work with adults, have had to fight so hard all through that child's life, to get access to any sort of support. So it's part of their learning history as well.
Yeah. I think I got a bit confused because I thought I was supposed to finish, like we were supposed to end this webinar at 12:30. So I was kind of hurrying, but one of the, Aisha's talking about negative stuff in the news. I so agree that we need more PBS stories out there, and we've got to tell our stories in a meaningful and engaging way, and just avoid some of the I love talking about all the different aspects of why behavior does what it does. We've got to keep that for ourselves, but just talk about some of the outcomes and the beautiful outcomes. I suppose the difficulty with that is, and we've been developing some case studies recently, is there's one person I've been working with recently who's just living the most amazing life in comparison to where he was a year ago. And we want to write up this case study, but there's also slight concern. He's not a goldfish. And how do we do that in a way that is like not sort of zooming in on his life in a kind of sort of slightly uncomfortable way? And I think also if you are a BCBA, there are very clear restrictions on what you are and are not allowed to talk about in terms of telling stories and testimonials and things. Zoe talking about practice leadership, I'm obsessed with practice leadership. And I actually think that it's the key to effective PBS personally within services, because PBS is obviously this at least part of the science, it's the methodology, but the PBS plan, it's not magic wand, it's not a magic document. It won't do anything on its own. And there's nothing more depressing to a practitioner than going into a service and finding their PBS plan in a Polly Pocket in the office. And it's clear that it's never been touched since the read and sign sheet was handed out 3 months ago. But again, that's happening so often, the PBS plans are not being used. Instead of being frustrated at the process, we need to think about what can we do to make sure that that's not happening. How can we challenge that? And some of the ways are through practice leadership and also through that competency-based training that we were talking about. We need a platform to share innovative approaches to housing and support. Oh, that would be good. Good practice and success stories. There is a PBS platform, a PBS support platform coming in April. Anyone that has been party to one of the PBS UK training projects gets automatic access. So we're hoping that there'll be a lot of good practice and success story sharing there. Where I am from, the problems with raspberry. Oh. So, yes, Neil's talking about there's a couple of different problems in there, but this came up in Teresa's talk, where there aren't appropriate respite or care provisions, and we're not able to deliver timely responses to people. And because of that, it escalates beyond we're not able to respond in an early intervention type fashion. And the person ends up just in increasing levels of security and inpatient services, very sadly. And I think you're absolutely right. Again, that's a problem with our system. At the moment, funding is only there when you are not coping. If you want access, particularly if you're still at home with your family, if you want access to specialist behaviour support, you either pay for it yourself or demonstrate you're not coping. And if a person has to if you have to get to a stage where you're not coping, then that's when potentially funding becomes available. Then actually it's going to cost an awful lot more than it would have if we had been able to support in the early stages. Oh no, it's not an easy problem. It's a desperate, difficult problem. PBS should be seen a way of life for practice. Yes, absolutely. PBS is not a bolt-on. It is not something we do when CQC are coming. It is not something we do when we have had a slightly rubbish inspection and CQC are saying that we don't have effective behaviour support plans. We had someone reach out to us recently and ask for 40 functional behaviour assessments because they had CQC had said they were not utilising the PBS approach. That is not what PBS is, and it doesn't actually help when we get, when the reports do that. I can see why they asked for it. PBS should be in the blood of your service. It should be as much a non-negotiable as, you know, signing off the meds sheets. And the aspects of PBS will obviously be unique to the different services that you are working in. PBS doesn't look the same for everyone, but it should be considered as much of a priority as any of the other non-negotiable tasks that day. And until we get to that space, then we will not see the quality of life that people deserve.
We have had just one Q&A come in. What do you think are the best avenues for getting PBS stories and its benefits out there?
So the CBF are doing some work, which is lovely, but I think obviously you've got the choice of social media. We've got to get outside the echo chamber. Which is obviously the strapline, Joe, for your podcast, which is about, you know, we all talk to one another. And my guess is that there's nobody in this room, or I hope that there's nobody in this room who is not sure where they sit on the, well, you know, I'm hoping that everybody sees the benefit that PBS can bring. But talking to one another will only get us so far. I think it's great for developing our skills, but not necessarily for improving the image of our science. And if we're going to do that, we need to be presenting at conferences that are not just about PBS. We need to put ourselves out there and talk to people who don't actually really know who we are. The other flip side of that is we've got to do a good job of listening. And I think sometimes we shy away from situations, and I know I do this on social media. I do not engage on social media in discussions about my, you know, not on my personal one, in discussions about my work, because personally, that's not what it is for me. And they can get so heated and so difficult very quickly. And I'm not convinced that you're going to be able to change people's minds on social media platforms. But talking to people in real life, doing a good job of listening to their concerns and answering those concerns in a respectful and person-centered way. That's not quite the right term, but I think that has to be done. You know, we can't shy away from that. We've got to be willing to have the conversations, and it's not easy. It's quite scary, actually, but it's going to be the only way that we start to improve the reputation of behavioural analysis and PBS in the UK and wider. If we just don't listen to people telling us they don't like it, then I'm not sure that works. Oh, Joe's just answering questions about where people can train, which is lovely. I'm glad that people are interested in that. You don't want to ask me. I went a very diverse route.
No, there's lots of options. So I've put my email there so that people can, ask me after the event, because that take forever.
Yes, yeah, Joe is the person to ask, though, Ken. So you're quite right. Alistair, collaboration, rapport building, and working with rather than against. I couldn't agree more. We have to make ourselves popular, and sometimes that takes we've got to rapport build with people that we wouldn't necessarily naturally build relationships in order to get outside of that echo chamber and to help people understand what we have to bring to the table. It's important to be clear that PBS isn't the answer to everything, and that we're not pretending that it is. You know, we have something potentially to bring, particularly for this cohort of people, that we really do have something to offer, but we're not pretending that what we offer is the only thing that is of value. All right.